I stood in the office while my mother and sister smirked, convinced they had bullied me out of my inheritance. They handed me a pen, demanding I sign over Grandma's beach house. I signed. Then I pulled out the real will, and their smiles vanished instantly. I was barely standing upright when the call came. My body felt like it was made of lead, a heaviness that settled into my marrow and refused to leave. For the last 3 weeks, since Grandma Rose passed, I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night. I was running on caffeine, grief, and the phantom routine of a caregiver who no longer had anyone to care for. I was sitting in the sunroom of the beach house, Grandma's pride and joy, the place where the salt air had stripped the paint from the railings and the floorboards creaked with a century of memories. I was staring at her empty rocking chair, the one facing the Atlantic, when my phone buzzed on the wicker table. It was my mother, Carol. "Claire," she said, her voice lacking any preamble or warmth. It was brisk, efficient. The tone she used when she was ordering a latte or complaining to a manager. "We need to meet, today, at the lawyer's office downtown, the one near the marina." "Mom, the funeral was 2 days ago," I whispered, my voice raspy. "I haven't even finished sorting through the medical equipment in the guest room. Can't this wait?" "No, it cannot wait," she snapped, and I could hear the faint, high-pitched giggle of my sister, Vanessa, in the background. "There are complications with the estate, administrative errors that need to be corrected immediately so we can all move on. Vanessa is flying back to the city tomorrow, and we need your signature before she leaves." "My signature? For what?" "For the house, obviously," Carol said, as if I were a slow child. "Grandma Rose made a mess of the paperwork in her final months. You know how she was, confused, we're just fixing it, be there at 2. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from a sudden, sharp drop in blood sugar and the overwhelming exhaustion of the last 3 years. I looked around the house. This wasn't just a building. It was the only sanctuary I had known since I packed up my life, quit my job in the city, and moved here to care for Rose when the dementia and physical frailty began to take hold. I walked to the kitchen, poured the rest of the cold coffee down the sink, and gripped the edge of the counter. They wanted the house. Of course they did. They hadn't visited in 2 years, not once during the bed sores, the night terrors, or the lucid moments where Rose cried for her family. But now that she was gone, they were swarming like vultures who had smelled a kill from miles away. I felt a wave of nausea, a physical manifestation of the heartbreak. I wasn't just grieving my grandmother, I was grieving the family I wished I had. I was physically ill, my immune system shot from stress, and emotionally fragile, hanging by a thread. And now they were going to try to cut that thread. I went upstairs to get dressed, putting on my black funeral dress because it was the only clean thing left in the laundry basket. As I looked in the mirror, I saw the dark circles under my eyes, the weight I'd lost. I looked weak. I looked like an easy target. That was exactly what they were counting on. But as I grabbed my purse, I paused. I reached into the back of my closet, inside an old, battered shoebox where I kept my own important papers, and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. I weighed it in my hand. It was heavy. I drove to the lawyer's office in a daze, the gray sky matching my internal landscape. When I walked into the waiting room, the receptionist didn't even look up. I sat in the corner, clutching my purse to my chest, feeling small. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Carol and Vanessa walked out to greet me, flanking a man I didn't recognize, a junior associate likely. They looked radiant. Vanessa was wearing a bright red designer dress, completely inappropriate for a period of mourning, and Carol was in a sharp beige suit, her hair perfectly coiffed. They looked like they were going to a celebratory brunch, not a legal proceeding for a deceased matriarch. "There she is," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that made my stomach turn. "Poor thing, you look terrible, Claire, really, just washed out." "Let's get this over with," Carol said, checking her watch. "I have a dermatologist appointment at 4. They ushered me into the conference room. The air was cold, sterile. They sat on one side of the mahogany table, a united front of expensive perfume and hostility. I sat alone on the other. The betrayal, I thought, looking at my mother's impatient face, was worse than the grief itself. The conference room was suffocatingly silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of Vanessa's acrylic nails on the polished wood table. The junior associate, Annie, Arvuz-looking man named Mr. Henderson, shuffled some papers. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "So," Carol began, leaning forward and clasping her hands. "Here is the situation, Claire. We've been reviewing Rose's files. It seems that in her state, towards the end, she scribbled down some nonsense about the beach house." "Nonsense?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "She was senile, Claire," Vanessa interjected, rolling her eyes. "She didn't know what day it was half the time. Mom and I spoke to Mr. Henderson here, and we all agree that her intentions were obviously for the property to go to the grandchildren. Specifically, the grandchildren who have families to support." She gestured to herself. Vanessa had 2 children, aged 6 and 8, whom I hadn't seen in 3 years because Vanessa claimed the drive to the beach was too long and boring for the kids. "The house is a burden," Carol added smoothly, sliding a document across the table toward me. "The taxes, the upkeep, it's falling apart, Claire. You're a single woman. You don't have the income to maintain a rotting Victorian mansion on the coast. Vanessa, however, has a husband in finance. They can afford to renovate it, turn it into a rental property. It's what Rose would have wanted, financial security for the family." I looked down at the document. It was a deed of variation and a waiver, effectively stating that I, Claire, voluntarily relinquished any claim to the property designated in the 2018 will, acknowledging that recent verbal amendments by the deceased favored Vanessa. "The 2018 will?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Is that the one we're looking at?" "It's the only valid one on file," Carol lied. Her eyes were hard, daring me to challenge her. "Anything else was just the ramblings of a dying woman. Now, we're trying to be generous here. Vanessa is willing to give you, let's say, $5,000 for your time, for helping out these last few years." "Helping out?" The words tasted like ash. "Mom, I lived there. I changed her diapers. I spoon-fed her. I managed her morphine drip." "And you lived rent-free?" Vanessa snapped, her mask of sweetness slipping. "You didn't pay a dime in rent for 3 years. If anything, you owe the estate money. But we're being nice. We're letting you walk away clean. Just sign the paper, Claire. Don't make this ugly. Grandma meant this house for my kids. Don't steal from children." I looked at them, really looked at them. My mother, who had visited Rose exactly twice in 3 years, both times staying for less than an hour because the smell of sickness bothered her. My sister, who had blocked my number when I called to ask her to say goodbye to Grandma over FaceTime because she was at a spa weekend. They sat there, smug and radiant, thinking they held all the cards. They thought I was the same quiet, submissive Claire who used to apologize for taking up space. They thought my exhaustion was weakness. They thought my silence was surrender. "You really think she was confused?" I asked softly. "She called me Barbara last Christmas," Carol scoffed. "She didn't know up from down." I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I let my shoulders slump, making myself look even smaller, even more defeated. "I just want to do what's right," I said, my voice trembling. "Exactly," Carol nodded, her eyes lighting up with greed. "Do the right thing, Claire, sign it." I watched Mr. Henderson sweat. He knew this was ethically gray, bordering on coercion, but Carol was a powerful local figure, and he was young. "Okay," I whispered, "I'll sign." Vanessa let out a breathy laugh of triumph. "Finally, thank God." I pressed the pen to the paper. I knew exactly what I was doing. I needed them to commit. I needed them to put their greed on the record, to officially claim that the 2018 will was the one they stood by, and to bully me into this corner. I signed my name, Claire. Carol snatched the paper away before the ink was dry. "Good. That settles it. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Vanessa wants to bring a contractor in on Monday to start gutting the kitchen. Gutting the kitchen? I asked, looking up. But Grandma loved those tiles. We hand-painted them together when I was 10. They're dated, Claire, Vanessa sneered. It's going to be an airbump. Nobody wants 1990s quaint. They want modern luxury. I reached down to my bag on the floor. You know, I said, my voice changing. The rasp was gone. The tremble had vanished. It's funny you mention the kitchen tiles. Why? Vanessa asked, already gathering her purse to leave. Because Grandma Rose and I talked about them a lot, I said, unzipping my bag. Specifically, 6 months ago, on her birthday, the day she was declared fully lucid by her neurologist. Carol froze. What are you talking about? I placed the manila envelope on the table. You guys seem so sure that she was confused, so sure T. Hat, you've won. I looked them dead in the eye, but you had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand why that moment in the lawyer's office was so charged, you have to understand the 3 years that led up to it. When Grandma Rose was diagnosed with terminal cancer, combined with the early stages of dementia, the family held a summit. Well, it was a Zoom call. I was living in the city, working as a junior archivist at a museum, a job I loved. Vanessa was already married to her finance husband, living in a sprawling McMansion in the suburbs. Carol was busy with her social clubs and her 3rd divorce. Someone needs to take care of her, Carol had said through the screen, sipping a glass of white wine. A facility is too expensive. The estate can't handle that drain. I can't do it, Vanessa had said immediately. I have the kids, I have a life, it's impossible. All eyes turned to the empty square on the screen where my camera was. Claire, Carol said, you're single, you rent, you can just go, it makes the most sense. And because I loved Grandma Rose, who was the only person who had ever made me feel seen, who had taught me how to restore antique furniture and listen to the ocean, I did it. I quit my job. I broke my lease. I moved into the drafty, salt spray-battered beach house. For 3 years, my life was a cycle of doctors, pharmacists, and bio-waste. I learned how to lift a human body without breaking my back. I learned how to soothe a woman who woke up screaming because she didn't know where she was. I watched my friends' lives move on via social media while I was trapped in a timeline measured by medication doses. Grandma Rose wasn't always confused, though. That was the lie Carol and Vanessa told themselves to sleep at night. There were long stretches, especially in the last year, where the medication balance was right and she was sharp as a tack. We spent evenings sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets. I read to her. We talked about history, about the house, about the greed she saw creeping into her daughter and other granddaughter. They're waiting for me to die, Claire, she had said to me one night, her hand gripping mine with surprising strength. I see it in their eyes when they FaceTime for 3 minutes. They're counting the silver. Don't say that, Grandma, I had tried to soothe her. It's true, she snapped, and I won't have it. Now back in the office, the antagonist of my life sat across from me. Vanessa. Vanessa wasn't just greedy, she was maliciously entitled. She was the kind of person who sent food back at restaurants after eating half of it. She was an influencer with a vague, undefined career that mostly involved posting photos of things she didn't pay for. She looked at the envelope I had placed on the table, and her lip curled. What is that? Vanessa asked, her voice shrill. Some drawing she made you? A letter? We don't care about sentimental trash, Claire. We have the deed signed over. Vanessa, I said calmly, do you remember Uncle Marcus? Carol went pale. Marcus? We haven't spoken to him in 10 years. He and your father had that falling out. Grandma Rose didn't have a falling out with him, I corrected. In fact, Uncle Marcus has been visiting the beach house once a month for the last 2 years. He's an estate attorney, a very, very good one. So, Vanessa challenged, though she looked less certain now. Mr. Henderson here handles the family trust. Mr. Henderson handles the old trust, I said. The one from 2018. I slid the contents of the envelope out. It wasn't just a document, it was a bound legal file, stamped and notarized. "This," I said, my finger resting on the cover page, "is the last will and testament of Rose Bennett, dated August 2023. 5 months ago." "That's impossible," Carol hissed. "She was incompetent, we have doctor's notes." "And I have a video deposition," I countered, leaning back in my chair. "Recorded by Uncle Marcus, witnessed by 2 independent psychiatrists who attested to her capacity on the day of the signing. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew exactly what you would do." Vanessa stood up, slamming her hands on the table. "You little witch, you manipulated her. You poisoned her against us while we were trying to live our lives." "I didn't poison anyone," I said. "I just handed her glasses of water while you were posting brunch photos. But here is the interesting part, Vanessa, you should sit down." "I'm not listening to this fraud," Vanessa screamed. "Sit down," I said, my voice dropping an octave, hard as steel. "Because this will has a no contest clause, but it also has a very specific trigger clause that you just activated the moment you made me sign that waiver." Carol grabbed Vanessa's arm and pulled her down. "What clause?" Carol asked, her voice trembling. "Uncle Marcus called it the Solomon Protocol," I said, opening the folder. "Grandma Rose predicted this exact scenario. She predicted you would try to bully me into giving up the house. She predicted you would claim it was for the children. So, she wrote a conditional inheritance." I looked at the stunned junior associate. "Mr. Henderson, I think you might want to call your senior partner. Or better yet," I pointed to the door, "you can invite the man who is standing in the hallway waiting for my signal." The door handle turned. The door swung open, and the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't just a change in air pressure, it was a shift in power. Uncle Marcus stood in the doorway. He was 70 years old, but he carried himself with the vitality of a man 20 years younger. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Vanessa's car, and he held a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen 1,000 courtrooms and won every time. Mr. Henderson, the junior associate, actually scrambled out of his chair. "Mr. Bennett, sir, I didn't know you were involved in this matter." "There is a great deal you don't know, Mr. Henderson," Marcus said, his voice a rich, commanding baritone that filled the small conference room. "Please, sit down. You're making the room nervous." He didn't look at Carol or Vanessa. He walked straight to the head of the table, the spot Mr. Henderson had vacated, and set his briefcase down with a heavy thud. "Marcus," Carol said, her voice wavering between indignation and fear. "What are you doing here? You haven't spoken to the family since Dad died." "I haven't spoken to you, Carol," Marcus corrected, finally turning his gaze on her. It was cold, clinical, the way a surgeon looks at a tumor. "I spoke to Rose weekly, and I have been representing Claire for the last 6 months." "Representing her?" Vanessa scoffed, trying to regain her footing. "Claire doesn't have any money for a lawyer like you." "Pro bono," Marcus said, clicking the latches of his briefcase. "Some cases are about money, Vanessa. Some are about justice. And some," he paused, looking at me with a warmth that made my chest tight, "some are simply about protecting the only decent person left in a lineage." I watched them, feeling a strange sensation. For years, I had been the doormat, the quiet one, the one who took the insults and the neglect because I was desperate for connection. But as I watched Marcus lay out the documents, I realized I wasn't just observing anymore. I was the architect of this moment. "The document Claire just signed," Marcus began, pointing a manicured finger at the waiver Carol was still clutching. "May I see it?" Carol hesitated, clutching it tighter. "It's a legal agreement. She signed it voluntarily." "I'd hardly call 3 against 1 in a closed room voluntary," Marcus noted dryly. "But it doesn't matter. That document references the 2018 will. Since the 2018 will has been superseded by the 2023 testament, that piece of paper is legally worthless. It's confetti." He held out his hand. Reluctantly, Carol handed it over. Marcus glanced at it, shook his head, and dropped it into a shredder bin in the corner of the room. The sound of the paper tearing was the only sound in the room for 10 seconds. "Now," Marcus said, sitting down, "let's discuss the reality of the situation. Claire, would you like to walk them through the timeline, or shall I?" "I'll do it," I said. I sat up straighter, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by the adrenaline of finally speaking the truth. "When I moved in to take care of Grandma," I began, locking eyes with my mother, "you told everyone I was mooching. You told the extended family I was living off her. But the truth is, I was managing her entire estate because she didn't trust you." "That's a lie," Carol shrieked. "She loved me." "She loved you," I corrected. "But she didn't trust you. She saw the credit card bills you tried to hide. She saw that Vanessa only called when she needed a down payment for a new car. And last year, when she was lucid, she asked me to investigate." "Investigate?" Vanessa's face paled. "Investigate what?" "You," I said. "Grandma Rose authorized me, as her power of attorney, to run a full financial background check on potential beneficiaries to ensure, and I quote, 'My legacy isn't snorted, gambled, or worn away.'" I reached into my bag again and pulled out a second folder. This one was blue. "I spent the last 4 months compiling this," I said, sliding it across the table. "While I was changing her bedding and crushing her pills, I was also tracing the money trails. You see, Grandma wasn't just testing my loyalty. She was testing your solvency." Vanessa reached for the folder, her hand shaking. She opened it, and her eyes went wide. "You had no right," she whispered. "I had every right," I said. "I was the executor named in the 2023 will. I had a fiduciary duty to the estate, and what I found changed everything." The silence that followed was heavy, thick W. It the weight of exposed secrets. Vanessa stared at the documents in the blue folder, bank statements, lien notices, and credit reports that I had legally obtained through the estate's discovery powers. "You're broke," I stated simply. It wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. "Vanessa, you and your husband are leveraged to the hilt. The house in the suburbs is underwater. The cars are leased. You have 3 maxed-out credit cards and a personal loan that's currently in default." Vanessa slammed the folder shut. "We are having a temporary liquidity issue. That's none of your business." "It became my business when you tried to steal Grandma's house to fix it," I said, my voice rising. "You didn't want the beach house for your kids, Vanessa. You wanted to liquidate it. You've already had 3 realtors quietly appraise the land value, haven't you? You weren't going to keep it in the family. You were going to bulldoze it and sell the lot to developers to pay off your debts." "So what if I was?" Vanessa spat, her face twisting into an ugly snarl. "It's an asset. Grandma is dead. She doesn't care what happens to the wood and the bricks. I have a family to save." "And you," I turned to Carol. "You knew. That's why you pushed for this meeting so fast. You lent Vanessa money you didn't have, didn't you? You dipped into your retirement fund to bail her out last year, and now you're scared." Carol looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. Her silence was a confession. "This is exactly what Rose feared," Uncle Marcus interjected, his voice calm but piercing. "She knew you were desperate, and she knew that desperation makes people cruel." Marcus opened the 2023 will. He put on a pair of reading glasses, the movement deliberate and slow, torturing them with the delay. "Let's read the specific clause that pertains to this meeting," Marcus said. "Clause 14, subsection B, we call it the Solomon Protocol." "Stop with the dramatic names," Carol snapped. "Just tell us what we get." "Very well," Marcus read. "To my daughter Carol and my granddaughter Vanessa, I leave the sum of $500,000 each, to be paid from the liquid assets of the estate." Carol's eyes lit up. Vanessa let out a breath she had been holding. The tension in their shoulders dropped instantly. 500,000 was enough to stop the bleeding. It was enough to save them. "However," Marcus continued, his voice hardening, "this bequest is subject to a strict condition of conduct." He looked up over his glasses. "Go on," Vanessa urged, leaning forward. Marcus resumed reading. "I, Rose Bennett, am aware that my granddaughter Claire has served as my primary caregiver at great personal sacrifice. I am also aware that my other relatives may view the beach house as a financial resource rather than a family legacy. Therefore, I have set a test. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew the words, but hearing them read aloud in Grandma's voice, through Marcus, made tears prick my eyes. If Carol and Vanessa accept the distribution of the estate as presented by my executor, Claire, without challenge, coercion, or harassment, they shall receive their cash inheritance. However, Marcus paused for effect. If they attempt to force Claire to relinquish the beach house, or if they attempt to challenge the validity of this will, or if they are found to have bullied, intimidated, or manipulated Claire in any way regarding the disposition of the property, then the following penalty is immediately triggered. Penalty, Carol whispered, her face draining of color. What penalty? Vanessa demanded. We didn't bully her, we just had a conversation. You threatened to evict her in 48 hours, Marcus noted, glancing at his notes. You called her a thief. You attempted to defraud her using an outdated will. I'd say that fits the definition of bullying and manipulation perfectly. Read the penalty, I said softly. Marcus nodded. In the event of such behavior, the cash bequests designated for Carol and Vanessa shall be voided entirely. The sum of $1 million shall instead be transferred immediately into a trust for the maintenance and restoration of the beach house. Carol and Vanessa shall receive nothing. Furthermore, any debts they owe to the estate, including the loans I gave them over the years which I kept careful record of, shall be called in immediately. The room went dead silent. You're joking, Vanessa breathed. That's not legal. You can't just take it away because we asked for the house. She didn't take it away because you asked, Marcus said, closing the folder. She took it away because you tried to steal it. You had a choice. You could have come in here today, hugged your sister, thanked her for caring for your grandmother, and asked about the will respectfully. If you had done that, you would be walking out of here with $500,000 each. But you didn't, I said. You chose. Greed, you chose cruelty. And Grandma Rose knew you would. This is a setup, Carol shouted, standing up so abruptly her chair tipped over. You set us up, you let us walk into this trap. I gave you a chance, I said, my voice steady. When I sat down, I asked you if you really thought she was confused. I gave you an out. I said, I just want to do what's right. If you had said, yes, Claire, let's just look at the current will, none of this would have happened. But you handed me a waiver and told me to sign or get out. You little. Vanessa lunged toward me, her face contorted with rage. Sit down, Marcus barked, his voice like a thunderclap. Unless you want to add assault to your list of problems today. Vanessa froze, trembling with impotent fury. She slowly sank back into her chair, realizing the magnitude of what she had just done. She hadn't just lost the house. She had lost the lifeboat that was supposed to save her from bankruptcy. You can't do this, Vanessa sobbed, the tears finally coming, not tears of grief but tears of self-pity. My kids, they'll lose their home, will lose everything. You should have thought about that before you tried to make Claire homeless, Marcus said coldly. But the fight wasn't over. I could see the gears turning in Carol's head. She was a survivor, a manipulator who had navigated 3 divorces and come out on top every time. She wasn't going to go down without burning the building down with her. Carol smoothed her skirt, her face composing itself into a mask of icy resolve. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. This is a very cute story, Marcus, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. And a very dramatic performance, Claire, but there is one thing you forgot. And what is that? I asked. Grandma Rose wasn't the only owner of the beach house, Carol said, a smug smile returning to her lips. Dad's name was on the deed, too. When he died 10 years ago, his share passed to me. I never signed it over to Mom. I own 50% of that house, and I don't consent to you living there. My stomach dropped. I looked at Marcus. Was it possible? Had we missed something? I'm going to force a partition sale, Carol announced, her confidence soaring as she saw my hesitation. "I will force the sale of the property. You can keep your half of the money, Claire, but the house goes. And since I'm the co-owner, I'm evicting you. Today." Vanessa wiped her eyes, looking at her mother with renewed hope. "Is that true? Can we do that?" "Absolutely," Carol said. "So take your little Solomon protocol and shove it. We're selling the house." The air in the room grew thin. If Carol owned half the house, the will didn't matter. She could force a sale. Everything I had fought for, preserving Grandma's legacy, the sanctuary, the history, would be gone. "I expected you might try that," Marcus said. He didn't look worried, he looked disappointed. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a single, yellowed piece of paper. It looked old, fragile. "What is that?" Carol asked, her eyes narrowing. "This," Marcus said, "is the quitclaim deed you signed in 2016. Carol's jaw dropped. I never signed that." "You did," Marcus said. "You needed bail money for your second husband. Do you remember? The DUI in Florida? You came to Rose begging for $50,000. She gave it to you, but on one condition." "No," Carol whispered. "She made you sign over your interest in the beach house," Marcus continued. "She knew you would try to use it as leverage one day. She filed this deed with the county clerk 7 years ago. I have the certified copy right here." He slid the yellowed paper across the table. It was undeniable. Carol's signature, bold and flourishing, was right there at the bottom. "You traded your birthright for bail money for a man who divorced you 6 months later," I said, feeling a mix of pity and disgust. "You don't own 50%, Mom. You don't own anything." But Carol stammered, her reality shattering. "And there is more," I said, pressing the advantage. "The investigation into Vanessa's finances revealed something else. Something about you, Mom." "Don't," Carol warned, her eyes darting to Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson should hear this," I said, "because it involves the estate." I opened the blue folder again and pulled out a bank transfer record. Last year, while Grandma was in the hospital with pneumonia, a check was written from her account for $10,000. The memo said medical expenses, but it wasn't paid to a hospital. It was deposited into an account held by C. Bennett Consulting. I looked at my mother. "That's your shell company, isn't it?" Mr. Henderson gasped. "That's embezzlement." "Exactly," Marcus said. "We have 3 instances of this. Unauthorized transfers totaling $35,000. Now, under normal circumstances, the estate would sue you for recovery. But since you just triggered the disinheritance clause, we have a different problem." "We're not going to sue you, Mom," I said, leaning forward. "Because I don't want to spend the next 5 years in court with you. I just want you gone." "Gone?" Carol asked, her voice trembling. "I want you to sign a document admitting to the transfers and agreeing to repay the estate from your own assets, whatever you have left," I said. "If you do that, and if you walk away from the beach house right now, we won't file criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud." "Criminal charges," Vanessa squeaked. "Elder abuse," Marcus confirmed. "Stealing from a dementia patient is a felony in this state, Carol. And since Vanessa knowingly accepted loans from that stolen money, she would be implicated as an accessory." The room spun. They had walked in thinking they were the hunters. They had thought I was the prey. Now, they were staring down the barrel of bankruptcy and prison time. "You have a choice," I said, echoing the words they had said to me earlier. "Do the right thing, sign the admission, agree to the terms, and leave us alone. Forever." Carol looked at the quitclaim deed. She looked at the bank records. She looked at Vanessa, who was sobbing into her hands. She realized she had been outplayed at every single turn. Rose had seen it all coming. Rose, the woman they called senile, had checkmated them from the grave. "Where do I sign?" Carol whispered, her voice dead. The scratching of the pen against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. Carol signed the confession with a hand that shook so violently the letters looked like they were formed during an earthquake. When she finished, she dropped the pen as if it were red-hot iron. There, she whispered, her voice hollowed out, stripped of all its usual imperious varnish. It's done, we're leaving. She stood up, grabbing her purse with a desperation that was painful to watch. Vanessa was already at the door, her face a mask of ruined mascara and blotchy red panic. Not yet, I said. I didn't shout, but the command stopped them in their tracks. We signed your papers, Claire, Vanessa shrieked, spinning around. We gave you the house, we admitted to the transfers. What more do you want? Blood. I want the truth, I said, standing up and smoothing the skirt of my dress. And I want it to be known. What are you talking about? Carol narrowed her eyes, a flicker of her old defiance returning. This is a confidential legal settlement. Marcus said so. The settlement is confidential, Marcus agreed, snapping his briefcase shut. The criminal charges are waived, but Claire's condition about the public record regarding the family narrative, that was Clause 15. We didn't agree to that, Carol snapped. You agreed to all terms requisite for the waiving of prosecution, Marcus reminded her. And Claire has one final term. I walked around the table, feeling a strange, cold calm. You invited Aunt Lydia, cousin Mark, and the rest of the dad's side of the family to the beach house at 4:00 p.m. today, didn't you, Mom? Carol froze. How did you know that? Because I saw the catering van pull up on the driveway camera before I left, I said. You were planning a victory party. You were going to announce that I had graciously stepped aside and that you and Vanessa were the new owners. You were going to spin the story before the ink was even dry. Carol's silence was confirmation enough. She had planned to humiliate me in absentia, to paint me as the failed, overwhelmed granddaughter who was relieved to be rescued by her capable mother and sister. We are going to that party, I said, and you are going to tell them the truth. I can't, Carol whispered. Lydia, she's the gossip of the county. If she knows, I'll be ruined socially. You should have thought about that before you embezzled from your dying mother, I said. We're taking my car. Marcus, you follow us. The drive back to the beach house was a 20-minute journey through purgatory. My mother and sister sat in the back seat of my sedan, silent and sullen. I drove with the windows down, letting the salt air fill the car, scrubbing away the scent of their expensive, cloying perfume. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, the house looked magnificent. The late afternoon sun hit the peeling white paint, turning it a warm gold. It stood defiant against the dunes, a testament to Grandma Rose's resilience. And parked next to the porch were 3 cars. Aunt Lydia, Uncle Bob, and my cousins were already there, standing on the wraparound porch, holding glasses of wine that Carol must have prearranged. They looked happy. They looked ready to celebrate. Smile, I said to the rearview mirror as I put the car in park. It's a party. We walked up the steps. The wood creaked under our feet, a sound I loved, but one that seemed to make Vanessa flinch. There they are. Aunt Lydia called out, waving a napkin. She was a large woman with a heart of gold but a tongue that could strip paint. We were wondering when the legal eagles would finish up. Carol, darling, the caterer said to tell you the crab cakes are warming. Carol stopped at the top of the stairs. She looked like she was about to faint. Vanessa was hiding behind her, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Well, Uncle Bob asked, grinning, don't keep us in suspense. Is it done? Is the renovation project officially a go? The silence stretched. The wind whipped the dune grass. The waves crashed rhythmically in the distance. Carol has something to tell you, I said, stepping to the side so I wasn't blocking their view. Go ahead, Mom. Carol looked at me. For a second, I saw pure hatred in her eyes. But then she looked past me to where Marcus was walking up the path, his briefcase in hand like a weapon of war. She looked at Aunt Lydia, whose smile was starting to falter. There has been a change of plans, Carol stammered. Change of plans, Aunt Lydia frowned. What kind of change? I won't be managing the estate, Carol said, her voice barely audible. And Vanessa won't be taking the house. What? Vanessa's husband, who had just come out the screen door holding a beer, looked confused. but we already booked the contractor for Monday. We have the demo crew scheduled. Cancel it, Vanessa snapped, her voice breaking. Just cancel it, Mike. I don't understand, Uncle Bob said, looking between us. Claire, what's going on? Why do they look like they've seen a ghost? They haven't seen a ghost, I said, my voice projecting clearly over the wind. They've just seen the will. But Carol said the will left it to them, Lydia said, confused. Carol was mistaken, I said, holding my ground. Grandma Rose left the beach house to me, in its entirety, along with the trust to maintain it. A murmur went through the group. I saw the shock on their faces. In our family, the hierarchy had always been Carol at the top, Vanessa as the golden child, and Claire as the invisible help. To hear that the hierarchy had been inverted was like hearing the sun had risen in the west. But why? Cousin Mark asked. No offense, Claire, but can you afford it? She can, Marcus said, stepping onto the porch. He commanded attention instantly. Because Rose Bennett was a very astute woman, she ensured that the caretaker, the only one who actually sacrificed her life for this family, was rewarded. And she also ensured, I added, looking directly at Carol, that those who tried to take advantage of her vulnerability were removed from the equation. Mom, Vanessa's husband asked, looking at Carol, what is she talking about? Carol began to weep. It wasn't a noble cry. It was the ugly, jagged sobbing of a woman who had run out of lies. We made a mistake, Carol choked out, the humiliation physically bending her spine. We tried to claim something that wasn't ours, and we were wrong. The house is Claire's. We are leaving. Leaving? Aunt Lydia asked. But the party? There is no party for us, Vanessa said, grabbing her husband's arm and practically dragging him toward the stairs. We have to go, now. Wait, I said. They stopped. The keys, I said, holding out my hand. Carol looked at me. She reached into her purse and pulled out the set of keys she had kept for years, the ones she used to let herself in to criticize my cleaning. She dropped them into my palm. The metal was cold and heavy. And yours, Vanessa, I said. I don't have a set, Vanessa lied. Yes, you do, I said. You took Grandma's spare set from the hook in the kitchen 3 days ago. I saw you. Vanessa made a sound of pure frustration, dug into her clutch, and slammed the keys into my hand. Happy, she spat. No, I said honestly. I'm not happy that it had to be this way. I'm not happy that you forced Grandma to protect herself from her own blood, but I am relieved. I turned to the rest of the family. You are all welcome to stay. The crab cakes are paid for, after all, but Carol and Vanessa are no longer welcome on this property. Not today, not ever. The sentence hung in the air, absolute and final. It was the public execution of their status. Aunt Lydia, who had worshipped Carol for decades, took a step back from her sister. Uncle Bob looked down at his shoes. The social exile had begun instantly. Carol let out a sob, turned, and ran down the stairs to her car. Vanessa followed, dragging her bewildered husband. We watched in silence as they scrambled into their vehicles, engines revving aggressively, and sped away down the gravel lane, kicking up a cloud of dust that the ocean breeze quickly swept away. I stood there, clutching the keys, my heart pounding in my ears. I felt lightheaded. Well, Aunt Lydia said, breaking the silence. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in why. Ears, there was a new respect in her eyes, a hesitation. I suppose we should make a toast to the new lady of the house. She raised her glass. To Claire, Uncle Marcus said, his voice warm and proud. To Claire, the family echoed. I looked out at the ocean, the waves crashing endlessly against the shore, indifferent to our human dramas. I took a deep breath of the salt air. It tasted like freedom. The fallout was swift and brutal, exactly as the legal documents had predicted. In the weeks that followed, the Solomon Protocol did its work. Without the influx of cash from the estate, Vanessa's financial house of cards collapsed. The foreclosure notice on her suburban McMansion was posted 3 weeks later. I heard through the family grapevine, Aunt Lydia, who had become my surprisingly fierce defender, that Vanessa and her husband had to move into a 2-bedroom rental on the other side of town. Her influencer lifestyle evaporated overnight when she couldn't afford the props or the trips. Carol fared no better. The admission of embezzlement she had signed was a ticking time bomb she had to live with. To pay back the $35,000 she had stolen from the estate, she had to liquidate her own assets. She sold her luxury SUV and her collection of designer handbags, but the biggest hit was to her reputation. In a small coastal town, secrets don't stay secret. Aunt Lydia, having felt betrayed by Carol's lies, made sure everyone knew the truth. Carol was quietly asked to step down from the garden club board. Her brunch invitations dried up. She became a pariah, the woman who had tried to rob her dead mother and cheat her own daughter. She eventually moved to a condo in Florida, putting 1,000 miles between herself and the shame. I didn't rejoice in their ruin. I didn't track their downfalls with glee. I simply deleted their numbers and focused on the work that mattered. The beach house needed me, and I needed it. With the trust fund Grandma Rose had set up, I didn't have to worry about the leaking roof or the rotting porch steps anymore. I hired a team, a local crew, not the slick city contractors Vanessa had wanted, and we began the restoration. I returned to my roots as a restoration specialist. I stripped the layers of cheap paint from the banisters to reveal the original mahogany. I restored the hand-painted tiles in the kitchen, the ones Vanessa had wanted to smash with a sledgehammer, cleaning them until the blue herons and yellow suns shone bright again. One afternoon, about 6 months after the confrontation, Uncle Marcus came by. He was wearing a linen suit and a Panama hat, looking ready for retirement. We sat on the newly repaired porch, drinking iced tea, watching the dune grass sway. "You've done good work, Claire," he said, tapping his cane on the floorboards. "The house hasn't looked this alive since Rose was in her 50s. "It feels alive," I said. "It feels like she's still here." "She is," Marcus said, "in the walls, in the decisions you make." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. "I found this in the safe deposit box when we were finalizing the last of the accounts," he said. "There was a note on it, for Claire, when the dust settles." I took the box and opened it. Inside was Grandma Rose's locket, the silver one she wore every day, the one with the picture of Grandpa inside. I had looked for it everywhere after she died, assuming it had been lost in the hospital shuffle. "She hid it," Marcus said gently. "She knew that if she left it out, Vanessa would have pawned it or Carol would have claimed it. She wanted you to have it when you were safe." Tears pricked my eyes. I clasped the cool silver in my hand. It was a final message from the grave, a tangible reminder that she had seen me. She had known I would fight for her legacy, even when I didn't know I had the strength to do it. "I miss her," I whispered. "I know," Marcus said. "But look around you, Claire. You saved her home. You exposed the rot in the family so the healthy parts could grow. You didn't just inherit a house. You inherited her spine." I smiled through my tears. He was right. The timid girl who had walked into that lawyer's office, terrified and shaking, was gone. She had been forged in the fire of that betrayal and come out stronger, harder, and more real. I was no longer just the caretaker. I was the matriarch of my own life. That evening, after Marcus left, I walked down to the water's edge. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and orange. I stood in the surf, letting the cold water rush over my feet. I thought about Carol and Vanessa, somewhere out there in the world, chasing money and status and coming up empty. And then I turned back to look at the house. The lights were on in the kitchen, casting a warm, golden glow through the windows. It stood tall and proud, a fortress of memories and a sanctuary for the foo. "It's your..." I touched the locket around my neck. "I'm home, Grandma," I said to the wind. And for the first time in a long time, the wind seemed to whisper back, "Welcome home."